Hello, my name is J. Patrick Boland. This is my trusted colleague Walter Douglas, and this is the first time I've spoken on camera for my YouTube channel, so thanks for being here. I'm the director of Live at the Agora, a documentary film project focused on the artists and people who made the Agora one of the most important music venues in America. Before we get into this piece, I want to quickly explain what you're about to watch. This is a select reel, which means it's raw documentary footage. Raw documentary footage that hasn't been color corrected or mixed for sound, and it's not a finished scene. In documentary filmmaking, select reels are used to pull together the strongest moments from interviews and archival material before shaping the final story. In this select reel, the spotlight is on Agora founder, legendary concert promoter, club owner, a gentleman who led rock and roll and live music entertainment industry to many firsts. The focus is on him, Hank Loconti. Not because he wanted it there, but because so much of what happened at the Agora was possible because of him. Hank believed the artist belonged at the center of everything. He built the room. He treated everyone associated with the Agora, from the performers to the people behind the scenes, like family. He took risks on new bands and then stepped aside to let the music speak for itself. What you're about to see is raw, unfiltered footage, memories from musicians, staff, and family that tell the story of the man who made the Agora a place where artists could become artists. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at Hank. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. What's up, buddy? That wasn't too bad, was it? Oh, man. He loves catching the ball.
You Slade?
Josh, you got this?
Hank Loconti was the Agora, but people didn't see him that, the Agora was the Agora. You said the man behind the curtain, there he was. People knew that he ran it, but it wasn't the Loconti show, it was the Agora.
When Hank passed away, I was sorry to see the Agora continue because the Agora was Hank.
Well, Hank was the Agora. Without Hank, the Agora was just a big, decent room that held 1,000 people. It was because of Hank and his personality and his dedication to making sure that everything ran smoothly and the bands, got treated well and all those things. That's what made the Agora. And it also didn't hurt to have 1,000 people there every night, which was great.
And you never got in the way. If guys were getting high backstage or something, he was, hey, he didn't come backstage. No, he let them do what they needed to do. You could have made a better dressing room though, Hank. Some bands had more than 2 people in them.
Hank's love for the collection and for the achievement of the Agora was boundless. And Hank's generosity was boundless. My father gave people opportunities because he had a big heart. If you had the will to work, you had a home. When we would fix up a club, no matter what city we were in, he would hire just someone off the street. I remember we hired a kid, he was like 15, 16 years old at the Dallas Agora, and he just wanted a job. He was sitting there on his bike. We brought him in. I taught him how to paint, and he wound up becoming the manager there. He would take people on. He would let people live in the basement here at the Agora. When we bought the building, we inherited a guy that was like the maintenance guy, and you would never have hired this person on an application, right? Frank, I don't know if you ever met Frank, but yeah, Frank became, I think he worked here for 20 years. And he was just a street guy, but he let him live here. So he had a big heart. Charity was big to him, and he took care of people. Smart people recognized that.
He wanted to help people all the time, and so, every once in a while I call him up. I'm like, hey, can you get us in there? I was like 15 or 16 years old, and I remember he put us on stage with Rastus. I was 16. I wasn't even old enough to be in the Agora, and here I am opening up for Rastus, at the Agora. It was like unbelievable,
Right.
But that's the way Hank was. He would do that all the time. Any new band I had, I'd call him up. I'd be like, hey, we're really, we're ready to get out there. And he would just, like on a Saturday night or whatever, like, yeah, come down and just open for these guys,
With regards to production staff, he didn't see, age, gender, color, and that was big back in the 60s or 70s. If you had the will to work, you had a home. In my father's heart, and we had women stage managers. The Kathy Grunn was head of hospitality. She became KISS's wardrobe manager. And then there was Joyce Halaska. She was the stage manager. Who hired a female stage manager at a rock club in the early 70s? I don't know of any. Black, white, it didn't matter. My father didn't have a prejudice bone in his body.
Understand one thing. I'm here because of my dear friend Hank Loconti right now. And Hank was a visionary. Hank with the Agora, when he started in 1966.
There's a tendency for many people as they get older to be less innovative, less risk-taking, less embracing of technology and change. He never stopped. You're talking about satellite broadcast and so forth. He never stopped.
He had the forethought to put a studio up there. I'd never seen any place like that. And the technology was kind of like drill holes in the ceiling and have the microphones go all the way up to the board, It was multi-track. That was unreal. And then, when we started doing the coffee break concerts, responsible for saying, hey, let's move them over to the Agora.
In some of that early live stuff, it wasn't the best, but it was still on the cutting edge and ahead of what everyone else was doing. Just to be able to have that ability, if you wanted to do a live album, you could do it right there. I thought that was pretty innovative as well.
People say there's 13 Agoras, there's actually 15, if you count Random and Cornell, and if you count 24th Street. So he actually, built up 15 Agoras, as well as several discos.
Opened one down in Columbus, and he opened some over in Europe, and I think he had one in Atlanta. Nothing worked like Cleveland, not even Columbus, not even Akron. There was a magic about him and that building, and it never came over to this building. This was just a place to go see a band.
Hank worked on the jukebox industry, and at that time, looking at what was getting play on a jukebox, I mean, you fed popular and you fed new stuff into it. It was radio in a different format, if you will. And I suspect he got a sense of where people's heads were and what they were listening to.
He was so on top of the music scene. He was always a week ahead of it, Sometimes, unfortunately, because he'd have kind of empty houses.
And you had Hank Loconti, you had Alex Cooley in Atlanta and Georgia, you had Bill Graham, and they were really up on the music scene. If you would look at the bills weekly of who was playing any one of those clubs, it was crazy. It became a who's who ultimately of all the world-class acts. All started off, and not by coincidence. Most of the big world-class acts started out by playing clubs.
The Agora moved to where it is today, in the old Metropolitan Theater. He became very interested in this Midtown corridor project. And today as we're sitting in Midtown is bustling, it's growing. Hank was a huge advocate for that. Yeah, certainly because his venue was here, but I think he saw the possibilities, and he was always thinking about this.
The reason why he chose this area here, a couple of reasons. The building was inexpensive. If he had not purchased this building would not be here. The city would have torn it down. It was an eyesore. It was dilapidated in the middle of an area that was that no one wanted to invest money in. And I believe that because he put his heart and soul and every penny he could gather into this building, it then did, he saw the vision with Midtown Corridor, and it brought a lot of eyeballs to the area, and media people, record labels, whatever, and it put a spotlight on this area.
need these individuals in these towns to put themselves on the line, to create a place to break acts. I mean, you can't just go straight to the top, you know, you're dependent on the mercy of others, so to speak. So you need these guys in these towns that are bold enough to open a small club, and because that's a struggle too, you know, to make it work. The benefit that they have is they realize that there are a lot of opening acts bouncing around the country that need gigs in between gigs. You know, they don't always follow along the schedule of a headliner. So they've got a day off to a young band is money going down the drain, right? Because you're making so little that you have to find ways of paying your hotel bills. So it's people like Hank Loconti and Alex Cooley and all these guys. They benefited, but the bands benefited.
And you know, maybe that's the word that we need to use in defining Hank. He took risks. He took risks in the acts that came in here. He took risks because the music that was beginning to grow in the late 70s and 80s was music that challenged even the concept of rock. It was edgy, it was challenging, so I think that's a risk on the part. You can never see that in Hank, though. You know, he was just a normal guy to talk to, but he had the ability to say, okay, I'll try this.
I'm working with Bad Company now, and we were just finished a tour in Europe, and one night we were talking about the first show that Bad Company ever did in the United States, and it was at the Agora. And the record had just exploded when they played there, and I remember when Hank booked it, he was sure it was a loss. But he stayed with it because he really believed that, well, we got guys from Mount the Hoople, we got guys from Free, all in the same band. It's going to be a monster. They probably could have played music hall, but they, you know, ended up playing the Agora because they were true to their word. They thought it was going to be like that every night.
Artists, they create their own music. There's no promoter in the world responsible for an artist's talent. But what made my father different, though, that from a lot of promoters looked at the bottom line. And even in the early days, it was cookie cutter. If this artist was tracking, they hired that artist for their club or their shows. He took chances. He didn't see bottom line. You know, that's what made him a great businessman, and maybe it's in some people's eyes not so great because he lost a lot of money taking chances. And he gave artists the chance that most promoters were never willing to give them that chance.
I think a lot of acts developed a lot of loyalty for Hank because he was so kind of receptive and open to what you were doing. I know that, as I say, we've been through town with all different kinds of shows. Some of them easy to promote, some of them harder to promote. Things could have been entirely different if it had been a different personality involved. You know, if it had been somebody whose interest was less sincere than Hank's was. You know, there are a lot of people who just look at these things as a business. And I think, you know, maybe not with everybody, but with a lot of musical acts, Hank became your champion in a way, and made sure that people knew about you.
He packaged his own festivals. He would go out and take risks. There was this one concert, like this is a concert that actually paid off for him. There were many, but this one in particular. So he books Todd Rundgren in Utopia. I think it was 1978 at Buckeye Lake Music Center. It was called Legend Valley then. And, you know, Todd Rundgren in Utopia, that was the big ticket. And that was going to draw, you know, a good amount of people. They figured maybe, you know, 15,000 people would show up. That was a good number, 20,000 for Todd Rundgren. And he booked 3 bands that really no one had ever heard of. And that was the Cars, Cheap Trick, and Eddie Money. He booked that show, I think, 11 months in advance. So all of a sudden, a few months before the show took place in the summertime, the Cars, Cheap Trick, Eddie Money, all massive hits, multiple hits for each band. There was 47,000 people, or it was over capacity that showed up for that show. And that one paid off big time. And in typical Hank fashion, he bonused every single one of those bands. Their contract said that they're going to make this much money, all right? And he didn't have to do this because there was no contract between him and the band saying he had to do this, but he actually paid out cash to each one of those bands for such a successful show. I don't, you'd have to look it up in the archives, but I'm willing to bet like the cars their guarantee was probably a couple $1,000s. You know, clearly they were worth way more than a couple $1,000s a day of the show. And I love Todd Rundgren. He's one of my, I love him. He's to death, not just as an artist, as a person. We played bocce ball together, right? But I taught him how to play bocce ball. He taught me how to play Donkey Kong. But I felt bad for him at that show because when Cheap Trick, Eddie Money, and the Cars were done, about half the people left the show. My father loved Todd Rundgren as a person and as an artist. But when it came to Todd Rundgren, there was a special place for him. Are we still rolling? Well, one last thing I'd like to say about my father is that he gave it all and more. Most people don't know this, but he had other opportunities to make a lot of money in other industries. One of them was in the insurance business. And he did concert insurance. And he could have made a fortune if he had stayed with doing concert insurance or entertainment insurance. You know, he did the insurance for like David Copperfield and other artists, but facility insurance. And if, you know, that would have been millions of dollars for him if he would have stayed with that and just focused on it. But the Agora just kept pulling him back and pulling him back, and so he chose to go with his passion and his loyalty to the music business rather than to the money.
Understand one thing. I'm here because of my dear friend Hank Loconti right now. And Hank was a visionary. Hank with the Agora, what he started in 1966, the conversations that he and I had, and his passion for having a Hall of Fame in Cleveland. And if it hadn't been for his passion and discussing it with me, and if it hadn't been for him calling me in 1985 in New York, he was my connection. And he's one of those unsung heroes of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. There's a lot of people today taking the bows for the Hall of Fame and this and everything else, but they don't know. This goes back to 1985, over 30 years ago. Nobody knows that. So this is what you want to be able to do, and give Henry Loconti the recognition that he deserves.
The last time I saw Hank, we were out in the restaurant, and he wasn't feeling well at that time, and he'd just come back. He flew to Chicago and back. Oh my gosh, you know, this guy is, he's up in age, and he's just done this. And
What was crazy was, I didn't realize, I kept seeing this little gray car outside every day, and on Sundays, and it just never left.
I remember Hank was always there. You know, he was always showing up and saying hello, and he was very approachable. And he was a man in charge, you know. But he wasn't in charge. He was like a leader. He wasn't a boss, you know. At least from what I could see, you know. He called the shots. He directed everything, but he did it in such a way that he included people in it, and it wasn't a matter of intimidation, you know. From my experience, it was always very welcoming, and it was always great to see him.
There was a time I worked on so many records in 2011 and 2012 that there was a stint I didn't leave this building for 44 days in a row. In those 44 days, I saw Hank every single day, even on holidays. And I'm sitting there going, I know people in my industry that are in their 20s and 30s that don't even put a fourth of the effort in. I couldn't believe it. And it was always a joke. He'd get here every day at 7 and leave not a minute before 7.
His passion was deep. If there was something he was passionate about, it was to the nth degree. Well, Hank had a great sense of humor, but he was dead serious about the Agora. He believed in Cleveland, and he believed in music. and that's his legacy.
At that point, I'd become very close with Hank, and it was in that summer because we became close very quickly. And I knew how important the legacy of the Agora was. I mean, Hank didn't die a wealthy man in terms of like money, you know, but he died wealthy in terms of experiences and those who think of him in terms of, you know, what he did to for many people, their lives, whether they're in the entertainment industry or not. And so that was, because he was so good to me, it was kind of like my way of wanting to give back in terms of like doing my small part to help preserve the legacy of this, you know, rock and roll cathedral, as we call it.
I know that Hank seemed to remember everything, every little thing that happened at every single one of our gigs. And every time I would run into him, he would have an anecdote from one of those gigs, something I might not even remember. But that's how sort of like into it he was, you know, how in any particular moment he was.
It's so cool to see him from that era tell stories about musicians that will never be on that level again. But I don't care what I had going on in my life. If Hank walked through that corridor, back, whether he was coming or going, and I had a chance to get some work, I would stop life to talk to him, just because his stories were unbelievable. It was incredible.
He met and worked with a lot of people who became internationally famous. He had all the bragging rights he could have if he wanted to exercise them. Oh, I knew. I never heard Hank do the I knew thing. Yeah. Hank was, yeah, I've done this. This is the Agora. Want the collection preserved. He didn't talk about his connections. He would mention them, but it wasn't in a way of bragging. And I appreciated that about him. And he's down to earth, everyday guy.
There wasn't one ego bone in his body. Like, the guy didn't have, I can't even explain it. He would tell stories and he'd say names that were jaw droppers, like maybe guys like me or anybody else, but to him they were just average people. But the cool thing is he didn't talk about a guy like Bruce Springsteen more than a musician who wasn't on that level.
He wasn't a groupie, but he never asked for, I've never seen my father ask for an autograph or go backstage to hang out with them. He was not a hang out with the stars kind of guy. He was very modest, you know.
There was a time where each city was synonymous with a promoter. And you had Hank Loconti, you had Alex Cooley in Atlanta and Georgia, you had Bill Graham. So everybody had, you had a real personal relationship with all of them.
I think a lot of acts developed a lot of loyalty for Hank because he was like your friend. You know, he would invite you out to his house, you know, to hang out, play baseball or something like that, play softball in the field nearby. So you always got kind of a different feeling when you came to Cleveland. You know, it was sort of being a part of the family for however briefly you were there. You know, you were sort of, you belonged for a little while.
I liked his style. You know, he was super easy to work with and let you do your own thing. And he was totally meticulous, and he loved the artists. Like, he wanted to make the artists feel like they were at home here. You know, that was like his big thing. If I had one takeaway with Dad, it would be, you know, that he wanted them to make it feel like home on the road.
Hank was like your friend. You know, he would invite you out to his house, you know, to hang out, play baseball or something like that, play softball in the field nearby. Things could have been entirely different if it had been a different personality involved. You know, if it had been somebody whose interest was less sincere than Hank's was. You know, there are a lot of people who just look at these things as a business. So you always got kind of a different feeling when you came to Cleveland. You know, it was sort of being a part of the family for however briefly you were there. You know, you were sort of, you belonged for a little while.
He was always good to the bands. The record label people loved him. because he was so good to the bands. And what I believe that bands liked the most, they knew what they were going to get at every Agora, whatever the shape was. I mean, size, because like Atlanta Agora was massive. And the Cleveland Agora on 24th Street was relatively small. But you were treated the same. You got more than you asked for. You know, if a rider said, we want cheeseburgers, you got cheeseburgers and steak. He was successful in life because of his great heart. But then in business, because he was such a nice guy, he probably lost a lot of money, being such a nice guy.
A lot of club owners that we played for were kind of hoodlums, you know. And Hank was such a gentleman. He was just totally from the heart. You never had a doubt a word he said, and he treated all the bands like he would treat his kids. You know, he was appreciative, and we just loved the guy. We would have done anything for him, which is borne out when we ended up backing Chuck Berry for him a couple times. That's another story altogether.
He was always smiling and always happy to be at work, except one time with Chuck Berry, but that's another story. One of the greatest things about my father was he was non-threatening. And who wants to be around a person that's threatening? You know, he didn't drink and smoke, and so he wasn't boisterous and saying the wrong things at the wrong times, like a lot of people in our business. He was just always the same. I never even heard him swear. People like to be around that.
He was non-threatening, and he was really the first person that I met in this industry that was like that. And he didn't care about how famous anybody was. They were just people to him.
Hank was a very naturally trusting guy, which sometimes to his loss, I think some people took advantage of him because he was just a sweet guy and he was trusting. So I think if somebody told him they were going to do something, he would take them at their word. And unfortunately, not everybody, lived up to that. But he was always really good to me and just a kind guy.
He was a gentleman, and a genuinely good guy. Sorry. And he really did a lot for the Raspberry.